What happens when the most peaceful species in the galaxy faces extinction? What happens when their desperate plea for help reaches the one planet known throughout the cosmos for its impossible, terrifying creatures? What happens when Earth's most dangerous predators hear the cry of the innocent? The Galactic Council called humans the caretakers of monsters. They never understood why Earth's apex predators didn't devour their human companions. They never realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their courage, or their stubborn refusal to surrender. It was their ability to turn the galaxy's most feared creatures into family. And, when family calls for help, the pack always answers. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned why you should never threaten something a human loves. This is the story of the day Earth's beasts went to war. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the research vessel Harmony, watching through the massive viewscreen as the Karathi homeworld burned beneath them. The peaceful blue-green planet that had welcomed Earth's first diplomatic mission 3 years ago was now scarred with black craters and orange flames that stretched across entire continents. Captain, Communications Officer Martinez called from her station, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I'm receiving another distress signal from the surface. It's from the children's sanctuary in the northern continent." Sarah's jaw clenched. The Karathi were perhaps the most gentle species humanity had ever encountered. Standing barely 4 feet tall, with large, expressive eyes and soft, downy fur that changed color with their emotions, they reminded many humans of a cross between a rabbit and a wise old owl. Their entire civilization was built around peace, art, and the nurturing of their young. They had no weapons, no military, no concept of war beyond the ancient stories their elders told of the dark times before their enlightenment. Which made the current situation all the more heartbreaking. "Put it through," Sarah ordered, though every fiber of her being dreaded what she was about to hear. The main screen flickered, and, suddenly, they were looking at Elder Mira, one of the Karathi's most respected caretakers. Her normally silver fur was now a deep, grief-stricken blue, and her large eyes were wet with tears. Behind her, Sarah could see dozens of Karathi younglings huddled together, their small forms trembling with fear. "Please," Elder Mira whispered, her voice breaking. "If there is anyone out there who can hear us, please help us. The Vraktar came without warning. They destroyed our cities, killed our people, and now they hunt our children like animals. We have nowhere left to run." The transmission was interrupted by a thunderous crash somewhere off-screen. Elder Myra's fur shifted to a terrified white as she looked over her shoulder, then, back at the camera. "We know we have nothing to offer in return," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "We are not warriors. We have no great technology, no vast wealth. But, our children, they are innocent. They have never harmed anyone. Please, if there is any mercy left in this galaxy, please save them." The screen went black, replaced by static. The bridge of the Harmony fell into stunned silence. Sarah had seen a lot in her 20 years with the Earth Colonial Navy, but watching an entire peaceful civilization face genocide was something that cut deep into her soul. "Captain," came a voice from the tactical station. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a veteran of the Centauri border wars, spoke with barely contained rage. "Long-range sensors show 17 Vraktar battlecruisers in orbit. They're conducting what appears to be systematic planetary bombardment." The Vraktar. Even the name made Sarah's blood run cold. They were a species of reptilian raiders who swept through the outer rim worlds like locusts, taking slaves, resources, and territory. They were known for their cruelty, their complete disregard for civilian life, and their practice of hunting sentient beings for sport. "What's our status?" Sarah asked. "We're a research vessel," Captain Jackson replied grimly. "Light shields, basic defensive weapons, and a crew of 68 scientists and support staff. Against 17 battlecruisers." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "There has to be something we can do," Martinez said, her voice desperate. "We can't just leave them." Sarah stared at the static-filled screen where Elder Myra's plea had been moments before. Every regulation, every bit of military training, every logical thought in her head told her to retreat. To report the situation to command and let the politicians figure out what to do. The Harmony wasn't a warship. They weren't equipped for combat. Engaging the Vraktar would be suicide. But, then, she thought about those younglings, huddled together in terror while monsters hunted them through the ruins of their peaceful world. Martinez, she said quietly. Send a priority transmission to Earth Command. Full spectrum burst. Tell them what's happening here and request immediate assistance. Captain, even if Command authorizes a response, it would take weeks for the fleet to get here, Jackson pointed out. The Korathi don't have weeks. They probably don't have hours. Sarah nodded, knowing he was right. But she also knew something else. Something that had been classified for the past 5 years, ever since humanity had made a discovery that had shocked even their own scientists. Martinez, after you send that message to Command, I want you to transmit on a very specific frequency, she said, moving to the communications console and entering a series of coordinates and encryption codes. This is going to be broadcast to Earth directly, bypassing all normal channels. Captain, that's a restricted frequency, Martinez said, confused. Only authorized for extreme emergencies involving potential extinction-level threats to human colonies. The Korathi aren't human, Jackson pointed out. Sarah looked at him steadily. No, but they're under our protection. We gave them our word when we established the cultural exchange program. And, more importantly, she paused, thinking about the classified files she'd been briefed on when she took command of the Harmony. They've done something that very few species in the galaxy have ever managed to do. What's that? Martinez asked. They've earned the love of Earth's children, Sarah replied. Every kid on Earth who's met a Korathi through the exchange program has fallen completely in love with them. They've become humanity's adopted little siblings. And, there's something you need to understand about my species. She moved to the center of the bridge, her expression growing hard as steel. Humans have a very simple rule when it comes to family: nobody hurts our family and gets away with it. Ever. She turned back to Martinez. Transmit this message on the emergency frequency. This is Captain Sarah Chin of the Colonial Research Vessel Harmony. We are at coordinates 247.158 by 89.442 in the Korathi system. The Korathi are under attack by Vraktar forces. They are calling for help, and they are our friends. We cannot defend them alone. We need the cavalry. Martinez's eyes widened as she realized what frequency that was. Captain, that's the frequency for. I know exactly what frequency it is, Sarah said quietly. Send the message. As Martinez began transmitting, Jackson moved closer to Sarah. Captain, are you sure about this? If Command finds out we used that frequency for non-human civilians, then I'll face the consequences, Sarah replied. But I've read the classified reports, Jackson. I know what happens when that particular call goes out. And, right now, those children down there need a miracle. She looked back at the view screen, where the Korathi homeworld continued to burn. And, I happen to know where to find one. 3 hours later, as the Harmony maintained its position at the edge of the Korathi system, trying to stay hidden from the Vraktar fleet while monitoring the increasingly desperate transmissions from the planet's surface, Martinez suddenly straightened at her console. Captain, I'm picking up something on long-range sensors. Multiple contacts approaching from the direction of the Sol system. Fleet ships? Jackson asked hopefully. Martinez frowned, checking her readings. Negative. The energy signatures are unusual. I'm reading what appears to be biological signatures, mixed with mechanical ones? Sarah felt a slow smile spread across her face. How many contacts? Difficult to say, Captain. The readings are unlike anything I've seen before. They're moving incredibly fast, but they're not following standard fleet formations. It's more like. She paused, struggling to find the words. Like a pack. A pack? Jackson repeated, confused. Sarah's smile grew wider. Martinez, can you get me a visual? Working on it, Captain. The contacts are still at extreme range, but wait. Her console lit up with new data. Captain, I'm also detecting some kind of massive energy surge from the direction of Earth. Something big is coming through hyperspace. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the starfield ahead of them. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, one by one, shapes began to emerge from hyperspace. But they weren't the sleek, metallic forms of human starships that Jackson was expecting. The first to appear was massive, easily the size of a battlecruiser, but it was clearly organic. Its hull pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat like a heartbeat, and its surface was covered in what looked like scales that shifted and moved in the starlight. Behind it came others, some serpentine and graceful, others bulky and armored, all clearly alive despite the fact that they were somehow surviving in the vacuum of space. "My God," Martinez whispered. "What are those things?" But Sarah was looking at the smaller contacts that were racing ahead of the larger forms. These she could see more clearly, and what she saw made her heart sing with fierce joy. Because racing through space, somehow breathing vacuum as easily as air, were creatures that every human child had dreamed of riding. Creatures that had sparked humanity's imagination for millennia. Creatures that had been thought to exist only in legends and fairy tales until 5 years ago, when humanity had made the greatest discovery in their history. Dragons. Real, living, breathing dragons. And, riding on their backs, strapped into custom-built spacesuits that gleamed with advanced technology, were humans. But, not just any humans. These were the Dragon Riders, humanity's most elite and most classified military unit. "Captain," Martinez said in an odd whisper, "I'm receiving a transmission from the lead contact." "Put it through," Sarah ordered. The screen shifted, and, suddenly, they were looking at a figure in advanced space armor, sitting astride what was clearly a massive dragon whose scales were the deep blue-black of the space between stars. When the figure spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight. "This is Commander Lisa Park of the 1st Dragon Corps. We received your call for help, Harmony. What's the situation with our friends?" Sarah felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Commander, the Korathi are under attack by 17 Vraktar battlecruisers. They're conducting genocide operations. We have confirmed reports of civilian casualties, including children." The Dragon Rider's expression, visible through her helmet visor, went cold as winter on Pluto. "Copy that, Harmony. Are the aggressors currently engaging in active hostilities against non-combatants?" "Confirmed," Sarah replied. "They're hunting children." Commander Park was quiet for a moment. Then, she turned slightly in her saddle and spoke to someone off-screen. "You heard that, Shadowwing? They're hunting children." Sarah couldn't hear the response, but she saw the dragon beneath Commander Park shift slightly, and, suddenly, the space around them seemed to grow colder despite the ship's environmental controls. "Captain Shen," Commander Park said, turning back to face the screen, "you might want to advise your crew to secure for shock waves. When dragons get angry, space tends to get a little violent." As if to punctuate her words, the great creature beneath her let out a sound that somehow carried through the vacuum of space, a roar so deep and primal that it seemed to vibrate through the hull of the Harmony itself. And, from behind Commander Park, dozens of similar roars answered the call. "How many dragons do you have with you?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Commander Park's smile was savage. "Enough," she replied. "Captain, you might want to get on the emergency frequency and tell any Korathi survivors to take cover in whatever shelters they can find. This is about to get messy." "Commander, those are Vraktar battlecruisers," Jackson interrupted. "Even dragons can't take on that kind of firepower." Commander Park looked at him for a moment, then laughed, a sound like winter wind through mountain peaks. "Lieutenant, you clearly haven't read the classified files. Let me explain something about Earth's dragons." She gestured to the massive form beneath her. "These aren't just large flying reptiles. They're apex predators that have been sharing their world with humans for millions of years. They're intelligent, they're bonded to their riders through telepathic links, and, most importantly, they've been listening to our stories about each other for 5 years now." The dragon shifted again, and Sarah could swear she saw something like anticipation in its massive eyes. "These dragons know about the Korathi. They've heard our children's laughter when they play with Korathi younglings. They've seen the artwork that human and Korathi children have made together. They understand friendship, Commander Jackson. And they understand family." Commander Park leaned forward in her saddle, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly through the transmission. And, when someone threatens family, dragons don't just fight. They burn worlds. The transmission ended, and Sarah watched through the viewscreen as the Dragon Corps began their approach to the Karathi homeworld. Behind the riders came the larger forms, creatures so massive that they defied easy classification. Some looked like traditional Western dragons, with wings that spanned kilometers. Others were more serpentine, their bodies undulating through space like sea serpents through water. Still others seemed to be made of living crystal or metal, their surfaces reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Captain," Martinez said softly, "I'm reading massive energy buildups from all the dragon contacts." "Whatever they're about to do." "I know," Sarah replied, unable to keep the fierce satisfaction out of her voice. "Martinez, get me a clear channel to the Karathi survivors. All frequencies." When the connection was established, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. "This is Captain Chen of the Earthship Harmony. To all Karathi survivors who can hear this transmission, help is here. The cavalry has arrived. Find shelter immediately and prepare for liberation." She paused, thinking of Elder Mira and those terrified younglings, hoping they were still alive to hear her words. "Your human friends heard your call for help. And we're bringing our dragons." Admiral Kreshtar of the Vraktar raiding fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship Blood of Conquest, watching with satisfaction as another Karathi settlement burned on the planet below. His elongated reptilian form was draped in the traditional armor of his clan, decorated with the bones and teeth of various sentient species he had personally killed over his long career. "Admiral," his tactical officer hissed, "the hunting parties report excellent progress. The Karathi civilians are easy prey. No weapons, no defenses, they simply run and scream." Kreshtar's lipless mouth stretched into what passed for a smile among his kind. "Excellent. How many of the young ones have we captured?" 47 so far, Admiral. The sportmasters are quite pleased with the selection. The smaller ones run faster and scream louder." The Admiral nodded approvingly. The Vraktar had been raiding the Outer Rim for decades, but it had been too long since they'd found a species so perfectly suited for their entertainment. The Karathi were ideal, peaceful, helpless, and possessed of an emotional range that made their suffering particularly satisfying to observe. "Admiral." The communications officer suddenly straightened at his station, his scales flushing the dark red of alarm. "I'm detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. They just dropped out of hyperspace." Kreshtar turned lazily toward the sensor displays. "Another species coming to play hero, most likely." It happened occasionally. Some military force would arrive, make threatening noises, realize they were outgunned, and either retreat or be destroyed. Either outcome was entertaining. "How many ships?" he asked casually. That's the strange thing, Admiral. I'm not reading ships. I'm reading what appear to be biological signatures. Large ones. And they're moving incredibly fast." Now Kreshtar was interested. He moved to the main tactical display, his clawed feet clicking on the metal deck plating. "Show me." The holographic display shimmered to life, showing the space around Karathi Prime. 17 Vraktar battlecruisers hung in orbit like metallic vultures, their weapons trained on the planet below. But, approaching from the edge of the system was something the Admiral had never seen before. The contacts appeared to be living creatures, but they were enormous, some as large as his own battlecruisers. They moved through space without any visible means of propulsion, and their energy signatures were unlike anything in the Vraktar databases. What species could survive in hard vacuum, his science officer wondered aloud. "No matter," Kreshtar replied, though he felt a small twinge of unease. "Deploy the forward squadrons. If these creatures think they can interfere with our hunt, they will learn otherwise." But, even as he gave the order, something strange was happening on the sensor readings. The large creatures were spreading out, surrounding his fleet, while smaller contacts raced ahead of them toward the planet. "Admiral," the communications officer called, his voice now tinged with genuine concern. "I'm receiving a transmission from one of the contacts. It's in galactic standard." "Put it through," Kreshtar ordered. The main screen flickered, and, suddenly, the bridge of the Blood of Conquest was looking at something that made even the hardened Vraktar raiders step back in alarm. It was clearly a humanoid figure, but it was encased in advanced armor and, sitting astride something that belonged in the nightmare legends of a dozen species. The creature beneath the armored figure was massive, its scales the color of fresh blood, with eyes like burning coals and teeth the size of Vraktar swords. When it moved its head slightly to look directly at the camera, every warrior on the bridge felt their predatory instincts scream warnings of immediate danger. "This is Commander Park of the Earth Dragon Corps," the figure said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of barely controlled fury. "You are hereby ordered to cease all hostile operations against the Karathi immediately and withdraw from this system." Kreshtar's surprise quickly gave way to amusement, then to anger. "Humans," he spat. "I should have known. Your species thinks it can police the galaxy." "We're not here as police," Commander Park replied, and something in her tone made the temperature on the bridge seem to drop several degrees. "We're here as friends of the Karathi. And you've been hunting their children." The Admiral's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "And what do you intend to do about it, human? You have perhaps a dozen of those creatures with you. I have 17 battlecruisers and 3,000 of the finest raiders in the galaxy." Commander Park was silent for a moment, then turned slightly in her saddle to speak to someone off-screen. "Did you hear that, Emberwing? He thinks there are only a dozen of us." Kreshtar frowned, checking his sensor readings again. The scanners were still showing roughly a dozen large contacts and perhaps twice that number of smaller ones. "My sensors clearly indicate." "Your sensors," Commander Park interrupted, "are calibrated for detecting ships and normal biological entities. They're not designed to detect dragons who don't particularly want to be detected." As if on cue, space around the Vraktar fleet began to shimmer. One by one, dragons materialized out of what had appeared to be empty vacuum. Not dozens, but hundreds. They had been there all along, somehow cloaked from detection, surrounding the raider fleet like a closing fist. Each dragon was unique and terrifying in its own way. Some were traditional Western dragons with massive wings and armored scales. Others were long and serpentine, their bodies coiling through space like living ribbons of destruction. Still others defied easy description, creatures of crystal and flame, of shadow and starlight, of elements that shouldn't have been able to exist in the hard vacuum of space. And, on the back of each dragon was a human rider, armored and armed and radiating an aura of lethal competence that even the Vraktar could recognize. "Impossible," Kreshtar whispered. "Dragons have been hiding from things that wanted to hurt them for millions of years," Commander Park explained conversationally. "They're very good at it. But they're even better at fighting." The Admiral's shock was quickly replaced by rage. So what if there were more of them than his sensors had initially detected? They were still just animals, no matter how large. "All ships, open fire. Destroy these creatures." The Vraktar battlecruisers opened up with everything they had. Plasma cannons, particle beam arrays, torpedo launchers, enough firepower to glass a planet poured out toward the surrounding dragons. And every single shot missed. The dragons moved like nothing Kreshtar had ever seen. They twisted and spiraled through space with impossible grace, their movements defying physics as they avoided the incoming fire. Some seemed to simply disappear from one location and reappear in another. Others absorbed the energy weapons into their scales and reflected the beams back at the attacking ships. "How are they moving like that?" his tactical officer demanded. "They're not just flying," Commander Park explained, her voice now coming from directly behind the Admiral. He spun around to see that somehow the transmission had shifted to show her dragon hovering just outside the bridge viewports, close enough that he could see the amused expression on her face through her helmet visor. "They're swimming through spacetime itself. Earth's dragons don't just live in 3 dimensions, Admiral. They live in several. All ships, ramming speed." Kreshtar screamed into his communicator. "Close formation, maximum firepower." But, as his battlecruisers began to move into tighter formation, the dragons struck. The first attack came from a massive creature that seemed to be made of living starlight. It simply flew straight through the hull of the Destroyer of Hope, one of Kreshtar's heaviest battlecruisers, as if the ship's armor was made of mist. When it emerged from the other side, the battlecruiser's engines were gone, simply disintegrated at the molecular level. The second attack was more traditional but no less devastating. A dragon the color of deep ocean water opened its mouth and breathed something that looked like liquid lightning. The beam cut through the Painbringer's shields as if they weren't there and carved the ship in half with surgical precision. All around the fleet, dragons were engaging the Vraktar ships with weapons and abilities that defied understanding. Some breathed fire that burned in vacuum, creating expanding spheres of superheated plasma that melted through hull armor. Others seemed to manipulate gravity itself, crushing ships like tin cans or flinging them away into the void. But it was the riders that truly terrified the Vraktar crews. Each human warrior fought with a style that seemed to blend advanced technology with something that looked almost like magic. They leaped from their dragon mounts directly into space, somehow breathing vacuum, and tore through ship hulls with weapons that cut through matter at the atomic level. Shields down to 40%, his tactical officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Engineering reports massive system failures throughout the ship. Kreshtar watched in growing horror as his mighty fleet was systematically dismantled by creatures he had dismissed as mere animals. But what truly chilled his blood was the precision of the attacks. The dragons weren't simply destroying his ships, they were carefully targeting weapons systems, engines, and shield generators while leaving life support and crew quarters largely intact. They were disabling the fleet, not destroying it. "Why aren't they killing us?" he whispered. Commander Park's voice came through the speakers again, and now she sounded almost bored. "Because we're not here for you, Admiral. You're just in our way." "Then, what do you want?" "We want the Korathi children you've captured. We want your hunting parties recalled from the surface. And we want you to leave this system and never come back." Kreshtar's pride warred with his survival instincts as he watched another of his battlecruisers lose its engines to a dragon that seemed to be made of crystallized time. "And if we refuse?" The temperature on the bridge dropped noticeably as every dragon in the fleet turned to look directly at the blood of conquest. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, each burning with ancient fury and the promise of extinction, focused on the Vraktar flagship. Then, Commander Park said quietly, "You'll discover why every species in this galaxy has legends about dragons. And you'll learn why all of those legends end with fire." To emphasize her point, the dragon beneath her opened its mouth slightly. Deep in its throat, something like a miniature star began to form, pulsing with energy that made the Vraktar ship's sensors scream warnings about imminent radiation exposure. "Admiral," his science officer called out in panic, "I'm reading energy buildups from all the dragon contacts. The power levels are... Admiral, they're off the scale. If they all fire at once..." Kreshtar didn't need the sentence finished. He had seen what one dragon's breath weapon could do to a battlecruiser. If hundreds of them fired simultaneously, they could probably crack the planet itself. But, even as his rational mind told him to surrender, his pride as a Vraktar raider rebelled. His kind had never backed down from a fight, never retreated, never showed weakness. Then, he made the mistake of looking directly into the eyes of Commander Park's dragon, and, suddenly, he understood something that turned his blood to ice water. The creature wasn't angry. It wasn't even particularly excited about the battle. Those burning eyes held nothing but cold, patient certainty, the look of a predator that had never doubted the outcome of any hunt in its entire existence. This wasn't a battle to the dragons. It was pest control. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "I'm receiving multiple transmissions from the surface. The hunting parties are reporting problems." "What kind of problems?" "They're being attacked by more dragons. Small ones. And they're working with the Korathi somehow." Kreshtar frowned. "That's impossible. The Korathi are pacifists. They don't have any military alliances." "Sir, you need to see this." The main screen shifted to show a feed from one of the surface hunting parties. The image was shaky, clearly from a helmet camera of a Vraktar raider who was running through a forest on the Korathi homeworld. Behind him, the camera caught glimpses of something pursuing the hunting party, flashes of scales and claws and fire moving through the trees with impossible speed. But what caught Kreshtar's attention wasn't the dragons. It was the small figures riding on their backs. Korathi younglings. Children who should have been cowering in terror were instead sitting confidently astride dragons barely larger than ponies, directing their mounts with the easy familiarity of born riders. "Impossible," he breathed. "The dragons bonded with them," Commander Park's voice explained gently. "It's what dragons do when they find younglings in distress. They adopt them, protect them, and, then, they teach them to fly." The camera feed showed one of the pursuing dragons catching up to a Vraktar raider. The creature was beautiful, scales like polished emeralds, wings like stained glass, and gentle eyes that spoke of intelligence and compassion. On its back sat a young Karathi, no more than a child, whose fur had shifted from the terror white of earlier to the confident gold of a born warrior. The dragon landed gracefully in front of the fleeing raider, blocking his path. The Karathi child leaned forward and spoke in the universal translator, her young voice carrying absolute authority. "You will release the captured children now. You will return them to their families. And you will leave our world." The Vraktar raider, a veteran of dozens of raids, found himself looking into the eyes of the dragon and slowly reaching for the cage containing several Karathi prisoners. He opened the lock with trembling claws and stepped back. "Thank you," the child said politely, and the dragon nuzzled the freed prisoners gently before taking wing again. All across the planet, the same scene was playing out. Dragons and their young Karathi riders were systematically liberating prisoners and escorting terrified raiders back to their landing craft. "How?" Kreshtar asked weakly. "Dragons recognize innocence," Commander Park explained. "And they protect it with their lives. When your people started hunting Karathi children, every dragon who heard about it volunteered for this mission. We didn't bring them here to fight you, Admiral." The space around the blood of conquest was filled with the soft sound of dragon wings as hundreds of the magnificent creatures moved closer. "We brought them here to rescue children. You just happened to be in the way." Elder Mira pressed herself against the wall of the underground shelter, trying to keep the remaining 12 younglings as quiet as possible. Above them, she could hear the heavy footsteps of Vraktar raiders searching through the ruins of what had been their peaceful school just hours ago. Her fur had long since shifted to the deep blue-black of despair. In her 300 years of life, she had never seen violence like this. The Karathi had no word for genocide in their language because the concept was so foreign to their nature that they had never needed one. "Elder Mira," whispered little Pip, one of the youngest at barely 6 years old. His normally bright silver fur was pale with terror. "Are the bad ones going to find us?" Before Mira could answer, a new sound echoed through the shelter, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, yet somehow it filled her with a strange sense of comfort rather than fear. Then came another sound, one that made her heart nearly stop with shock. A voice, speaking in accented but clear Karathi, was calling from somewhere above. "Hello? Is anyone down there? We're here to help." But it wasn't a Vraktar voice or even an adult voice. It was the voice of a child, probably no older than the younglings huddled around her. "We're not going to hurt you," the voice continued gently. "My name is Tommy. I'm from Earth. And I brought my friend Starwing to help rescue you." Myra's large eyes widened. She knew that name, Tommy Martinez, age 9, from the cultural exchange program. He had spent 2 months on Karathi Prime the previous year, and every youngling in her school had adored him. But what was a human child doing here in the middle of this nightmare? "Tommy?" Pip called out tentatively. "Pip. Is that you?" The joy in the human child's voice was unmistakable. "Hang on, we're coming down." What happened next would be burned into Myra's memory for the rest of her life. The ceiling of the shelter suddenly glowed with a soft, warm light, and then, incredibly, a section of it simply faded away like morning mist. Through the opening descended something that belonged in the oldest stories of her people, a dragon. But this wasn't the terrifying monster of ancient legends. This dragon was perhaps the most beautiful thing Mira had ever seen. No larger than a riding horse, it had scales that shifted through the colors of a sunset, gold and pink and deep purple, all flowing together like liquid light. Its wings were translucent, catching and reflecting the bioluminescent patterns that Karathi used to light their homes. And, riding on its back, grinning widely and looking for all the world like this was the greatest adventure of his young life, was Tommy Martinez. He was wearing some kind of scale armor that seemed to be alive, shifting colors to match his dragon's hide, and his helmet was shaped like a dragon's head with glowing eyes. "Hi, everyone," Tommy called cheerfully as his dragon landed gently in the shelter. "Sorry it took us so long to get here. We had to fly all the way from Earth." The Korathi younglings stared in amazement. Several of them began to purr, the sound their species made when they encountered something that filled them with wonder and joy. "Tommy," Mira managed to whisper, "how is this possible? How are you here? And what is this magnificent creature?" Tommy's face grew serious for a moment, though his eyes still sparkled with excitement. "Elder Mira, this is Starwing. She's my dragon partner. We heard that bad people were hurting our friends, so we came to help." The dragon, Starwing, lowered her graceful head and touched Mira gently with her snout. The contact sent a warm wave of reassurance through the elder's mind, along with something else, images and emotions that didn't belong to her. She saw vast forests filled with dragons of every size and color. She felt the joy of flight, the warm security of a bond between dragon and rider. And, threaded through it all was a fierce, protective love that reminded her exactly of how she felt about her own students. "She likes you," Tommy explained unnecessarily. "Dragons can sense good people. And Starwing says you smell like flowers and stories." Despite everything that had happened, Mira found herself smiling. "She smells like starlight and cinnamon. That's because she's been eating those pastries you taught me to make." Tommy laughed. Dragons love sweet things almost as much as they love protecting children. Another youngling, a girl named Harmony whose fur was slowly shifting from fear white to curious yellow, approached the dragon hesitantly. "Is she really real? Dragons are just stories." "All the best stories are real somewhere," Tommy said sagely, in the way that only children can be wise. "You just have to know where to look." Starwing lowered herself closer to the younglings, and, suddenly, they were all around her, touching her scales with wonder, laughing as her whiskers tickled them, marveling at the warmth that radiated from her body. "How did you know we needed help?" Pip asked, now completely unafraid as he petted Starwing's neck. "Dragons hear everything," Tommy explained. "They hear laughing and crying, wishes and fears, stories and songs. When Elder Mira called for help, every dragon on Earth heard it. And, when they heard that children were in danger." He paused, his young face growing fierce with protective anger. "Well, nothing makes dragons angrier than people who hurt children." Above them, the thrumming sound grew louder, and, through the opening in the ceiling, Mira could see flashes of larger shapes moving through the sky. "Are there more dragons?" she asked. "Lots more," Tommy confirmed. "The grown-ups brought the big dragons to deal with the bad ships in space. But, us kids came with the smaller dragons to rescue everyone down here." "Us kids?" Harmony repeated. Tommy's grin returned full force. "Oh yeah. I'm not the only one here. Every human kid who's ever met a Korathi wanted to come help. Our parents said we were too young for a rescue mission, but the dragons disagreed." As if summoned by his words, more openings appeared in the ceiling. Through them came other dragons, each one unique and beautiful, each one carrying a human child. Mira recognized several of the children from the exchange program: Sarah Kim, age 11, riding a dragon that looked like it was carved from jade; Marcus Johnson, age 8, on a dragon whose scales were the deep blue of ocean depths; Luna Reyes, age 10, partnered with a dragon that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight. "The dragons chose us," Sarah explained as she dismounted gracefully. As soon as they heard about what was happening here, they started bonding with kids who had met Korathi before. They said we understood friendship better than the adults. And we did really well in dragon school. Marcus added proudly. "We learned to fly and to talk to dragons and everything." "Dragon school?" Mira asked faintly. "It's been secret for 5 years," Luna said conspiratorially. "Ever since the first dragons came back to Earth. The grown-ups wanted to study them and figure out how to use them. But the dragons only wanted to bond with kids who had pure hearts." Tommy nodded seriously. "Dragons can see inside people, you know. They can tell if someone is good or bad, if they really love children or if they're just pretending. That's why there are dragon riders but no dragon armies. The dragons won't fight for people who don't understand love. More younglings were arriving now, carried by other dragon child pairs from shelters and hiding places throughout the ruined city. Each rescue was the same, the dragons somehow sensing where the children were hidden, the careful approach, the gentle contact, the explosion of joy when the Karathi younglings realized they were safe. Mira watched in amazement as the human children and their dragon partners worked together with an efficiency that spoke of long practice and deep trust. They moved like a single organism, anticipating each other's needs, communicating through touches and glances as much as words. "How long have you been training for this?" she asked Tommy as Starwing carefully lifted an injured youngling onto her back. "Ever since we met you guys," Tommy replied simply. "The dragons started coming to Earth 5 years ago, but they were really sad and lonely. They'd been hiding for millions of years because people were afraid of them or wanted to hurt them. But then, they started watching us play with Karathi kids, and they remembered what it felt like to love someone." He paused to help an elderly Karathi onto another dragon's back. "See, dragons used to take care of human children too, way back in the old days. But people forgot, and the dragons had to hide. But when they saw how happy we were with our Karathi friends, they decided to come back. They said friendship was worth the risk. And now they're our partners forever," Sarah added, scratching behind her jade dragon's ears. "We learn from each other. They teach us about flying and courage and protecting what we love. We teach them about friendship and laughter and how to make really good cookies." "Cookies are very important to dragons," Marcus said solemnly. "Almost as important as rescuing people." Above them, the sounds of battle were growing louder. But Mira found that she was no longer afraid. These children, these dragons, they radiated such confidence and joy that it was impossible to believe anything could truly harm them. "Tommy," she said gently, "are you children really safe doing this? This is very dangerous." Tommy's expression grew serious again, and, suddenly, he looked far older than his 9 years. "Elder Mira, do you know why dragons breathe fire?" She shook her head. "It's because they love so much that it burns inside them. And, when someone threatens something they love, that fire has to come out." He looked around at all the Karathi children and adults who were now safely gathered in the shelter. "We learned to love you guys the first day we met you. And dragons understand love better than anyone." Starwing made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and nuzzled Tommy's cheek. "Besides," Luna added with the practical wisdom of a 10-year-old, "the dragons would never let anything bad happen to us. They're very good at protecting things they care about." As if to prove her point, there was a sudden commotion above. Through the opening in the ceiling, Mira could see several Raktar raiders approaching, their weapons drawn and their faces twisted with rage. But, before they could even fully enter the space, they found themselves face to face with a dozen young dragons, all of whom had suddenly moved to place themselves protectively between the raiders and the children. The effect was immediate. The Raktar, for all their reputation as fearsome warriors, took one look at those dragon eyes that burned with protective fury and the promise of swift retribution, and slowly began backing away. "We don't want to hurt anyone," Tommy called up to them, his voice still cheerful but now carrying an undertone of steel. "But, if you try to hurt our friends, our dragons might get upset. And, you really don't want to make a dragon upset." To emphasize his point, Starwing opened her mouth slightly, and a small flame danced on her tongue, beautiful and mesmerizing and clearly hot enough to melt metal. The raiders retreated rapidly. "See?" Tommy said to Mira with his usual grin. "Everything's going to be fine. The dragons are here now." And, looking around at the impossible sight of human children and their dragon partners efficiently organizing the rescue of an entire civilization, Mira found herself believing him completely. Captain Sarachan watched from the bridge of the Harmony as something extraordinary unfolded in the space around Karathi Prime. The battle between the Dragon Corps and the Raktar fleet had been unlike anything she had ever witnessed, but what was happening now transcended her understanding of warfare entirely. The Raktar battlecruisers hung powerless in space, their weapons disabled, their engines dead, their crews trapped but alive. But they were no longer the focus of attention. Instead, all eyes were turned toward the massive forms that had been hovering at the edge of the battle, the Ancient Ones. "Captain," Martinez whispered from her communications station, "I'm reading energy signatures from those larger dragons they're off any scale I've ever seen. It's like they're tapping into the background radiation of space itself." Sarah nodded, unable to take her eyes off the magnificent creatures. These weren't the battle dragons that had engaged the Vraktar fleet, impressive as those had been. These were something else entirely, being so old and powerful that they seemed to bend reality around them simply by existing. The largest of them was a creature that defied easy description. It appeared to be made of living starlight, its body shifting between solid matter and pure energy. When it moved, space itself rippled around it like water. Its eyes were twin galaxies, ancient and wise and filled with the kind of patient power that could reshape worlds. Beside it floated another ancient one, this one crystalline and geometric, its faceted surface reflecting not just light but time itself. Sarah could swear she saw glimpses of possible futures and forgotten pasts dancing across its scales. A third ancient dragon seemed to be composed of living void, not darkness, but the fundamental emptiness between stars. Yet somehow it radiated warmth and comfort rather than the cold of space. "They're beautiful," Lieutenant Jackson breathed, his earlier tactical concerns forgotten in the face of such majesty. "They're also incredibly old," came a new voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see Commander Park materializing on the bridge, somehow having teleported directly from her dragon to their ship. Her armor rippled with the same energy patterns as the creatures outside, and her eyes held depths that spoke of a connection to something far beyond human understanding. "How old?" Sarah asked. "Old enough to remember when this galaxy was young," Commander Park replied. "Old enough to have watched civilizations rise and fall like seasons. The one on the left is called Star Weaver, she helped birth some of the suns you see in the sky. The crystalline one is Timekeeper, he's seen every possible future and past. And the dark one is Voidheart, she holds the spaces between thoughts, the pauses between heartbeats." "Why are they here?" Jackson asked in awe. Commander Park's expression grew soft. "Because they heard children crying. And when ancient dragons hear children in pain." She trailed off, looking out at the massive beings with something like worship in her eyes. "Well, let's just say that mountains have moved for smaller reasons." "Captain Chen," Starweaver's voice suddenly filled the bridge, though the ancient dragon was thousands of kilometers away. The voice was like music made of light, impossible to fully comprehend but beautiful beyond description. "We would speak with you." Sarah found herself nodding without conscious thought. "Of course, Ancient One. You called for help when our younglings were threatened. This act will not be forgotten. But now we must address those who would harm children." On the main viewscreen, Sarah could see the Vraktar flagship, its hull scarred from dragonfire but its crew still alive inside. Admiral Kreshtar's reptilian form was visible through the bridge viewport, and even from this distance, Sarah could see the terror in his posture. "What will you do to them?" she asked. Timekeeper's voice joined Star Weaver's, though it sounded like the echo of eternity itself. "We will teach them the weight of their choices. Every species must learn that some lines cannot be crossed." The three ancient dragons moved closer to the Vraktar fleet, and, as they did, something impossible began to happen. Space around the disabled ship started to change, becoming fluid and malleable like warm clay. "What are they doing?" Martinez asked. "Showing the Vraktar the true cost of hunting children," Commander Park explained. "Ancient dragons don't just fight. They rewrite reality itself." Admiral Kreshtar and his crews were about to experience something that would fundamentally change their understanding of the universe. Aboard the Blood of Conquest, alarms were screaming as impossible readings flooded every sensor array. The ship's AI was reporting that the basic laws of physics were being violated in the space immediately around them. "Admiral," the science officer called out in a voice tight with panic, "space itself is becoming unstable. I'm reading temporal distortions, gravitational anomalies, and what appears to be localized reality fluctuations." Kreshtar barely heard him. He was staring through the viewport at the three massive beings approaching his fleet, and every predatory instinct he possessed was screaming that he was in the presence of apex predators so far beyond his understanding that he might as well be a microbe facing a god. Then, Starweaver reached out with one delicate talon and simply touched the hull of his ship. The touch was gentle, barely registering on the ship's sensors. But the effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every Vraktar aboard suddenly found themselves experiencing something their species had never evolved to comprehend: empathy. Not just intellectual understanding of others' pain, but actual, visceral experience of every moment of suffering they had inflicted. Kreshtar felt his consciousness suddenly expanded to include the terror of every Karathi child his raiders had hunted, the grief of every parent who had watched their younglings captured, the despair of every elder who had seen their peaceful world burn. But it didn't stop there. The empathy spread backward through time, forcing him to experience the suffering his previous raids had caused. Every slave taken, every civilian killed, every act of cruelty he had ordered or condoned, he felt it all from the victim's perspective. Around him, his crew was experiencing the same devastating revelation. The ship's communications filled with the sounds of hardened raiders weeping as they truly understood, for the first time in their lives, what they had done to others. Timekeeper's contribution was even more profound. The crystalline ancient dragon touched another ship in the fleet, and, suddenly, its crew was experiencing time from the perspective of their victims. They saw how their actions rippled forward through generations, how the trauma they inflicted would affect children not yet born, how their cruelty created cycles of pain that would echo through centuries. But Voidheart's gift was perhaps the most transformative of all. The dark ancient dragon simply looked at the remaining ships, and their crews suddenly found themselves experiencing the absence, the empty spaces left behind when innocent lives were taken. They felt the silence where laughter should have been, the darkness where hope should have lived, the void where love should have grown. "Make it stop," Kreshtar whispered, tears streaming down his scarred face. "Please, make it stop." Starweaver's voice filled his mind, not harsh but implacably firm. "This is what you have done, Kreshtar of the Vraktar. This is the weight of your choices. We do not inflict punishment, we merely show truth." "I didn't know," the Admiral sobbed. "I never understood." "Now you do," Timekeeper added. "The question is, what will you do with this knowledge?" For a long moment, the entire Vraktar fleet hung in space, its crews experiencing the full emotional weight of their crimes. Some of the raiders would never recover from the revelation, their minds simply weren't equipped to handle such overwhelming empathy. But others, like Kreshtar himself, found something in the experience that they had never expected to discover. Redemption. What must we do?" Kreshtar asked, his voice broken but somehow cleaner than it had been in decades. "You will return all captives," Voidheart spoke, her voice like a gentle darkness. "You will leave this system and never return. And you will remember what you have learned here today. But more than that," Starweaver continued, "you will become something your species has never been before. You will become protectors instead of predators." The ancient dragon's talon moved again, this time pressing gently against Kreshtar's forehead through the ship's hull. Suddenly, his mind was flooded with new images, visions of what his people could become if they chose a different path. He saw Vraktar ships responding to distress calls instead of causing them. He saw his warriors using their strength to defend the weak instead of preying upon them. He saw a future where his species was known not for cruelty but for their fierce protection of innocence. "This is what you could be," Starweaver explained. "This is the path that opens before you now. Choose wisely, for you will not receive this gift again." The three ancient dragons began to withdraw, and, as they did, space slowly returned to normal around the Vraktar fleet. But the crews would never be normal again. They had been fundamentally changed at the deepest level of their being. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, his voice still shaky from the experience. "All ships report the same thing. The captives, they're being released voluntarily. The crews are refusing orders to continue the raid." Kreshtar nodded slowly. He understood completely. How could anyone who had experienced what they had just experienced ever harm an innocent again? "Send a message to all ships," he ordered. "Full withdrawal from this system. All weapons are to be powered down. All captives are to be returned immediately." "And, after that, Admiral?" Kreshtar looked out at the ancient dragons, who were now retreating to the edge of the system but whose presence still filled him with awe and something he had never felt before: hope. After that, we find a new purpose. We become what we should have been all along. Back on the Harmony, Sarah watched as the impossible scene concluded. The Vraktar fleet was already beginning to withdraw, but not in defeat, in transformation. She could see shuttles launching from their ships, carrying liberated Karathi prisoners back to the planet's surface. Will it last? She asked Commander Park. The dragon rider smiled. When ancient dragons touch a mind, they don't just show truth, they plant seeds of wisdom that will grow for generations. The Vraktar will remember this day for the rest of their lives. And, more importantly, they'll pass the memory to their children. So this is how dragons truly fight, Sarah mused. Not with fire and claws, but by changing hearts. Sometimes, Commander Park agreed. But, don't forget, they also bite really, really hard when they need to. As if to prove her point, one of the smaller battle dragons flew past the Harmony's viewport, a human child on its back waving cheerfully at them while holding what appeared to be a Karathi youngling who was laughing with pure joy. The children, Sarah realized. This was all about the children from the beginning. Dragons exist to protect the innocent, Commander Park confirmed. Everything else is just details. And, now the galaxy knows, if you threaten a child anywhere in known space, the dragons will hear about it. And, they will come. She paused, looking out at the majestic forms of the ancient dragons as they prepared to return to wherever such beings dwelt between crises. All of them. 6 months after the liberation of Karathi Prime, the galaxy had become a very different place. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, humanity's first joint venture with the Karathi Collective. Through the massive transparisteel windows, she could see something that would have been impossible to imagine just a year ago: dragons flying freely through space alongside ships from dozens of different species, their riders working together to patrol the shipping lanes and respond to distress calls. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Human technology meshed seamlessly with Karathi bioarchitecture, creating structures that were both functional and beautiful. Gardens floated in zero-gravity chambers, tended by Karathi botanists and human agronomists working side by side. Children from both species attended classes together, learning languages and mathematics and the ancient art of dragon bonding. Captain Chen, a young voice called from behind her. Sarah turned to see Tommy Martinez approaching, now 10 years old and wearing the blue and silver uniform of a junior dragon rider. His partner Starwing perched nearby, having somehow shrunk herself down to the size of a house cat, a trick that still amazed human scientists and delighted everyone else. "Hello, Tommy," Sarah smiled. "How's training going?" "Really good." Tommy beamed. "Starwing and I are learning deep space navigation. Did you know that dragons can sense gravity wells from 3 star systems away? And they can use solar wind currents to fly faster than some ships." Starwing chirped proudly and nuzzled Tommy's cheek, leaving a faint shimmer of scales that would protect him from radiation for the next several hours. "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "Are you ready for your first official mission?" Tommy's eyes lit up with excitement, but his expression quickly grew serious. "Is it about the distress call from the Centauri Collective?" Sarah nodded gravely. "Pirates have been attacking civilian transports in the Outer Rim. Standard naval patrols can't cover all the shipping lanes, and the pirates have been specifically targeting refugee ships carrying children." "Then, they're really, really stupid," Tommy said with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child. "Don't they know about the Dragon Compact?" The Dragon Compact. It was what historians were already calling the agreement that had emerged from the events at Karathi Prime. Not a formal treaty, dragons had no patience for bureaucracy, but an understanding that had spread throughout known space like wildfire. Any species, any world, any individual who harmed children could expect a visit from the dragons. It had started with the transformed Vraktar. Admiral Kreshtar, now calling himself Protector instead of his old title, had led his entire fleet in a campaign to hunt down the pirates and slavers who preyed on the weak. Other former raider clans had followed suit, their crews fundamentally changed by encounters with the ancient dragons' truth-sharing. But it hadn't stopped there. Word of the dragons' power and their protection of innocence had spread, and species throughout the galaxy had begun reaching out to Earth, requesting protection agreements and offering their own services in return. Tommy, Sarah said gently, this mission is going to be different from your training exercises. These pirates are dangerous, and they won't hesitate to hurt children if they think it will help them escape. Tommy's expression grew fierce, and, for a moment Sarah could see the echo of dragon fire in his young eyes. Then, they're going to learn why that's a really bad idea. Starwing made a sound like crystalline wind chimes, dragon laughter, and, suddenly, expanded back to her normal size, big enough for Tommy to ride comfortably. Besides, Tommy added as he swung into his saddle with practiced ease, I won't be alone. The whole junior corps is going, plus a bunch of the senior riders, plus Whisperwind and her younglings. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Whisperwind is bringing her hatchlings? She says they need to learn early that some things are worth fighting for, Tommy explained. And, baby dragons are really good at finding people who are hiding. He paused, his expression growing thoughtful in the way that children sometimes become when they're processing something complex. Captain, why do adults always seem so surprised that dragons want to protect children? It seems obvious to me. Sarah considered the question carefully. I think it's because most adults have forgotten what it feels like to be completely innocent. We've all had to make compromises, tell lies, hurt people even when we didn't want to. But, children and dragons, you both still remember what pure love feels like. Tommy nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. That's why dragons bond with kids instead of grown-ups, most of the time. Kids love without asking for anything back. And, that's exactly the kind of love dragons understand, Sarah agreed. A gentle chime sounded through the station's communication system, followed by Commander Park's voice, all Dragon Corps personnel, prepare for departure. Mission briefing in Base 7 in 15 minutes. Tommy straightened in his saddle, suddenly, looking far more mature than his 10 years. We should go. The pirates have been attacking ships for 3 weeks now. Every day we wait is another day children are scared. As Sarah watched Tommy and Starwing fly toward the departure bay, she reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day at Karathi Prime. The galaxy was learning to see dragons not as monsters from ancient legends, but as guardians of everything pure and innocent in the universe. Base 7 was a massive space, large enough to accommodate dragons of all sizes. As Sarah arrived for the mission briefing, she was struck by the sight of dozens of dragon rider pairs preparing for departure. Some were human children with their bonded partners, others were adult riders who had proven themselves worthy of a dragon's trust through years of protecting others. But, what really caught her attention were the Karathi younglings who were now riding alongside their human friends. The events at their homeworld had forged a bond between the two species that went far beyond formal alliance. Karathi children had proven to be natural dragon riders, their gentle nature and instinctive empathy making them ideal partners for the smaller, more sensitive dragon breeds. Commander Park stood at the center of the bay, her own dragon Emberwing coiled behind her like a living mountain of fire and scales. Attention, everyone. Intelligence reports indicate that the pirate fleet consists of 12 ships operating in the Centauri shipping corridor. They've been targeting refugee transports specifically because they know these ships carry vulnerable populations and minimal defenses. A young Karathi rider, barely 8 years old, raised her hand. Commander Park, why do the pirates want to hurt refugees? They don't have anything valuable. Commander Park's expression softened as she looked at the child. Some beings hurt others not for profit, but because they enjoy causing pain. The refugees are vulnerable, which makes them easy targets for people who have forgotten how to feel empathy. Then, we need to remind them, Tommy said simply. Exactly, Commander Park agreed. This mission has 2 objectives: rescue any prisoners the pirates have taken, and ensure that these particular pirates never threaten innocents again. An older rider, probably 15, spoke up, are we authorized for full engagement? The ancient dragons have given their blessing, Commander Park replied. Starweaver herself has said that those who prey upon refugees have chosen to place themselves outside the protection of civilization. A shiver ran through the assembled riders. When an ancient dragon declared someone beyond redemption, it meant they had crossed a line so fundamental that even divine patience had limits. However, Commander Park continued, our primary mission is rescue, not revenge. We save the innocents first. Everything else is secondary. The briefing continued with tactical details, patrol routes, and communication protocols. But Sarah found herself focusing on the faces of the young riders. They showed no fear, only determination. These children had bonded with creatures capable of tearing apart battleships, and they wielded that power with a wisdom that put most adults to shame. As the Dragon Corps prepared to depart, Sarah made her way to the observation deck to watch. The sight never failed to take her breath away, dozens of dragons launching into space, their riders' small figures against their magnificent forms, moving together with a grace and purpose that spoke of perfect harmony between human will and draconic power. The mission to stop the pirates was successful, though perhaps not in the way anyone had expected. The pirates, it turned out, had made the mistake of capturing several refugee children and planning to sell them into slavery. When the Dragon Corps arrived at the pirates' hidden base, they found the children locked in cargo holds, frightened and hungry but otherwise unharmed. The rescue itself took less than an hour. Dragons were remarkably good at finding hidden things, and pirate weapons proved entirely useless against creatures that could become intangible at will or absorb energy attacks and redirect them back at their attackers. But it was what happened after the rescue that would become legend. Tommy and Starwing were carrying one of the rescued children, a young Elderani girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, when they encountered the pirate captain trying to escape in a small fighter craft. The captain opened fire on them, clearly intending to kill the child rather than let her be rescued. Starwing's reaction was swift and decisive. She simply looked at the pirate ship and exhaled gently. The ship didn't explode. It didn't burn. Instead, every molecule of its hull simply ceased to exist, leaving the pirate captain floating in space in an emergency suit, staring at a dragon whose eyes now burned with the cold fire of absolute judgment. "You tried to kill a child," Tommy said simply, his young voice carrying clearly through the radio frequencies. "Dragons don't forgive that." The pirate captain found himself surrounded by dozens of dragons, all of them focused on him with the same implacable stare. For a moment that seemed to last eternity, he experienced what Kreshtar and his crews had felt months earlier, the weight of every innocent life he had harmed, the understanding of what his cruelty had cost the universe. When the dragons withdrew, the pirate captain was a broken man, weeping uncontrollably and begging to be allowed to spend the rest of his life making amends for his crimes. Word of the incident spread quickly through the galaxy's underworld. Pirates, slavers, and other predators began to whisper of the children who rode dragons, of young voices that spoke with the authority of cosmic justice, of the terrible mercy that awaited those who harmed innocents. Some continued their evil ways despite the warnings. They did not last long. Others, like the former Vraktar, chose a different path entirely. Within a year, the Dragon Compact had become an unwritten law that governed civilized space. Children were not to be harmed, refugees were not to be preyed upon, and the innocent were to be protected by all who had the power to do so. And, watching over it all were the dragons and their young riders, guardians of everything pure and good in a galaxy that had forgotten how precious such things were. As Sarah watched Tommy and his fellow riders return from their mission, all of them escorting refugee ships safely to their destinations, she smiled to herself. The galaxy had cried out for mercy, and the Earth's beasts had answered. But they had brought more than rescue. They had brought hope, and the promise that innocence would always have protectors, and that love would always have wings. And, in a universe full of darkness, that made all the difference.